All right, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome onto the podcast today Christine Haskell. She is the principal of Christine Haskell Consulting, and she's going to be a teacher for us at our upcoming TDWI Las Vegas event taking place in February, right around the corner. Hard to believe we're already almost in 2025, Christine, but I'm excited to have her on today. We're going to talk about driving data projects and the different aspects of that. She's written a book on the topic, so I know we're going to have a lot to talk about here on this episode. But before we get into all the good questions, Christine, if you don't mind, I like to ask some folks for a brief background before we jump into the nitty-gritty for everyone to get to know you a little bit better. Do you mind if you share just a little bit about yourself and your expertise and how you got to where you are?
Well, I've been in technology about 30 years, which makes me feel old saying that. But I mean, I've been in technology a long time, and I've been teaching grad school about almost 10 years now. And in terms of how I got into this business, I mean, I guess you could say it was sort of by accident. I mean, I started out an English major and ended up doing jobs in the internet, when it came out. So
Hmm.
um, it sort of was happenstance.
Well, that's fantastic. And I know that you mentioned your teaching. I think you're at USC and Washington State, from what I remember. For folks that are interested in maybe
Hmm.
checking out more of your work, it sounds like they can find you at those two establishments. But okay, so let's dive in here. Driving data projects, something I think every company, big or small, is probably wondering what they should be doing. How can they start driving these products? And I want to ask specifically about the book, as I mentioned, you wrote a book on the topic. What inspired you to write this book, and why do you feel it's particularly timely right now?
Well, there's so much data, but great insights I think are much harder to come by. And I've seen many organizations start ambitious data projects and end up failing, and not because they lack the right data, but because they lack the right mindset and approach. And I wrote this because I wanted to address the elephant in the room, which is the success with data isn't just a technical problem; it's cultural. Um, this is a timely message because we're at a point where data is so pervasive, but understanding how to use it to drive real business value is still a mystery for many. And I think that sentiment is only compounded now with AI.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think what we here at TDWI mirrors that. Certainly, with all the infatuation with generative AI specifically, makes that a little bit convoluted. Okay, obviously timely for the book to be out now. Can you tell me a little bit if there's, a specific group of people that you were aiming this book for? Is this more, seasoned data scientists or managers, or is it, maybe broader usage for
Well,
non-technical folks?
I think there's two extremes. I think there's some that would benefit from early career, and I think there's some that are more in the season space. But basically, this book is for data translators. It's for anyone who's in the trenches who of driving data projects, whether you're a data scientist and you're working through algorithms, or you're a manager and you're trying to translate those insights into decisions. Um, what I found is that many teams speak different languages. Like if you're in the business, you're talking ROI, and data teams are talking requirements and algorithms. And the book is attempting to bridge those worlds by offering practical, actionable advice for everyone involved. And so that's equally relevant to someone new to the field or a senior leader trying to understand how to make better use of their data resources.
Hmm. And I think one of the key themes seems to be this ambidexterity that is brought up. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that term and in the context of this data projects, like what it means to be ambidextrous?
Yeah, ambidexterity in data projects is about mastering two complementary skill sets and moving fluidly in between them. And on one side, you have traditional technical skill and management capabilities and things like product management and lean and agile methodologies. And on the other side, you have essential emotional, socio-intelligence skills like creativity and communication and critical thinking. And the real power comes from going fluidly in between those two domains. And this fluidity naturally develops into broader capabilities like self direction and adaptability and growth mindset. Like like the real growth mindset. So these can't be superficial behaviors. Then I'll give you an example. So in a training session, I've seen people deliberately ask questions that they already know the answer to and trying to demonstrate kind of good behavior. And that misses the point. Real ambidexterity or adaptability, as it's sort of now being called, is about authentically navigating uncertainty and managing the genuine discomfort, like the belly discomfort that comes without knowing all the answers when the stakes are high, when it really counts. And the impact of that approach becomes clear in organizations. So without ambidexterity, teams fall into one of two common traps. So you're either endless, you're kind of stuck in endless experimentation without delivering value, or excessive focus on operations at the expense of innovation. And true ambidexterity enables both innovation and operational excellence to go kind of simultaneously.
Yeah, I think, and it sounds like this is maybe prescriptive for organizations just as much as it is for individuals as well.
Yeah.
Right? Like this, you can take this and use it organizationally or by yourself and try and be a little bit on both ends there. But it does seem challenging. It seems like there's a lot that goes into being able to do that fluid movement, whether that organizationally or personally. So how do you
Mm-hmm.
recommend that organizations try to cultivate this type of
Yeah.
ambidexterity?
I mean, it's definitely a challenge. It's a challenge individually to get that kind of balance, and it's a
Hmm.
challenge for an organization too, as well. But it starts with that adaptive mindset that I just talked about. And teams need to recognize that these are not competing goals; they're complementary ones. And so, some teams will opt to create, or organizations will opt to create kind of dual track processes. Well, they'll have one team or a portion of a team focused on innovation and experimentation, while the other team maintains and optimizes existing solutions. And other teams will opt to have kind of a rhythmic approach where there's shorter cycles and enabling everyone to contribute. And I'd say Amazon's OP1, OP2 planning process is an example. And, Microsoft used to have an incredibly burdensome, like back in the day, annual planning process that took months. It took months where only certain people could participate. It was behind closed doors, and only to shelve that strategy because there wasn't complete buy-in, and it was back to short-term monthly goals. Amazon's OP1 planning process took a whole group of exceptionally smart people over a very short period of time, like days, and did several breakout sessions. And it used their famous work backwards schedule to our annual planning. And it helped direct their strategic planning process. And it allowed both long-term kind of prairie dog up for that long-term view, and then back to short-term kind of tactical day-to-day operations. And both of these things have pros and cons, but and they can be demoralizing or empowering depending on how they're led, right? Both of them.
Hmm.
But at the leadership level, it's about setting the tone and encouraging risk taking in certain spaces while demanding discipline in others. And again, back to that adaptive mindset, that sense of balance. And leaders need to be clear about when it's time to explore and when it's time to execute. And being able to toggle elegantly, and the key is fluidly and elegantly between the two, right? That
Hmm.
sort of herky jerky, all in, all out is that I explained with Microsoft, just as an example, because they make an easy target of their older days. I don't know what they're doing now, but that sort of older approach, that waterfall approach, is really hard. To kind of do that sort of, you have a very, very difficult time going back and forth. So it makes it hard.
Yeah. So I guess you kind of talked, I think maybe step one, I'm trying to get into some of the more granular steps here. It sounds like step one might be that mentality piece, right? Maybe step one is
Mm-hmm.
start to kind of think in that way, maybe organize in that way. If you don't mind, what would be like step two in the process there once you kind of have that, maybe some buy-in about the mentality first? What would be the next step, do you think?
Well, I mean, there's a number of steps in the book. We're kind of going a little bit off script, but some of it's the mindset. There's a framework in the book. I talk about kind of going through a discovery process and a design process, implement and maintain. It's loosely built off of the software development life cycle. And then there's a change management process at the end. And I think one of the things that uh, data teams often forget is cultivating the culture for change, right? They don't think it's their purview. They go through a checklist of projects and then they're done. And thinking about sustaining that change and getting people on the bus and being happy about being on the bus and keeping people on the bus, that change aspect is often forgotten or someone else's responsibility, or that detachment from keeping people included and thinking of them as stakeholders versus users, which is also a pivot that I take in the book, is always referring to them as stakeholders, um, is not part of that mindset. And so that I try to cultivate that mindset really early about thinking about stakeholders, and always taking a stakeholder point of view. And so that's why I blend that language early, and blend the methodology early as well.
Right. Well, and then you kind of talked a little bit about leadership over the course of the last couple minutes here. So maybe can you tell us a little bit more about how leadership plays a role in, in this ambidexterity model, and then of course, maybe with that cultivating the culture aspect as well.
Well, leadership is critical in cultivating ambidexterity or adaptiveness because it requires both permission and discipline. Leaders need to empower teams to take those calculated risks when the stakes are high, but also set clear expectations for when those risks need to be turned into value. And it's about creating a culture where experimentation is encouraged, but with a framework. So where you can explore freely, but still have the tether to the business's core needs. And leaders who can instill that balance between flexibility and accountability will find their teams more adaptable and effective in driving those initiatives. Because I think when people get lost is sort of when, you know, it's not clear, right? And then you get a
Yeah.
lot of that sort of finger pointing.
No, that's very true. That's very true. Okay, I have one more question regarding the book here
Mm.
before I ask you to pivot and start talking a little bit more about what we're going to do in Las Vegas. So if you could maybe have one key takeaway for readers that you're hoping after they've done, with reading your book, that they would, leave and being able to take with them, what would that be?
Well, I want readers to realize that data is a tool and not a solution. And that the magic happens when you combine data with human insight, curiosity, creativity. I'll say leadership, but it's really around humility. And it's not about who has the biggest data set or spreadsheet. A lot of people just sort of pack it in like all the questions, and it's really about who's asking the right questions and looking at the right measures and taking the right actions. Um, and from there, the outcomes and values are just byproducts of a well-constructed problem. And I'm always telling my students to think through the end of the problem, and if that problem is oversimplified or if it's too immature in the thinking, it won't achieve the outcome or the value. So the problem itself has to be correct. So my hope is that people finish the book feeling empowered and informed on whatever the next step is for them and not overwhelmed. And I want them to feel ready to take control of their data projects from a greater sense of enthusiasm, or confidence.
Hmm. Okay, fantastic. And for folks that are interested, I will go ahead and put a link in the description of this episode so you can find Christine's book if you're interested in, potentially purchasing and reading it for yourself. And so I do want to pivot though, as I mentioned, you're going to be teaching a session for us at TDWI Las Vegas coming up in February 2025. Would you mind maybe sharing a little bit of insight? And I know it's going to be tied somewhat to, what we just talked about there, but I'd love to hear maybe a little synopsis of what the session might be for folks.
Yeah, well, the course is based on the book, which is based on sort of two primary areas that I saw my students skin their knees and that I see industry both in the jobs that I had throughout my whole career, but also currently, and I'm seeing this again amplified by AI, that there is a people have a problem navigating the data stack. And that's even become worse using Gen AI tools.
Right. Yeah.
There's the lack of knowledge of how to move through the AI stack from the point at which you ask a question into how you instrument and how it transforms and how it comes out, is it's almost the same as the lack of knowledge of a combustion engine moving from stick to automatic. And when we, even using that analogy, like I don't need to know how to use a stick anymore. And maybe one might not need to know how data moves through a system. But the thing is, you do. Like you still need to know how to reverse engineer the output that Gen AI puts out
Hmm.
in order to know that you've gotten flawed data. And until you can trust that data, which I don't really see, I don't see that in our life, in my lifetime. I don't see that right now. um, you still need to know, in this analogy, how to drive a stick. You still
Hmm.
need to know how to reverse engineer, where the stuff came from. And you still need to know, if you want to use Gen AI to do a task, you still need to know how that task got done in the manual world to know that the output you got was good or bad.
Hmm.
um, and so that's how to navigate the stack, right? That's part of that. That's that part of that literacy component. The second part is um, how to move through a data project and adapt the tools to your needs. And adapting is also a core skill. And so when you take training like PMP or Sigma, one of the biggest gripes from taking those courses, and I thought they were great training. I took both of those in my career. But one of the biggest hurdles is conjugating those frameworks for your own culture. When I took Sigma, I was at Microsoft, and I had to translate, because it rejected everything that wasn't built there. I had to translate every single tool I got there into something that Microsoft could accept,
Wow.
because they just wouldn't accept anything that wasn't theirs, right?
Hmm.
So at the time, right, I think it's probably different, but back way back, this is 15 years ago, right? But and a lot of cultures are like that, where it's just, if it wasn't here, if it doesn't sound like something that I recognize, I'm just not going to accept it. And so learn how to adapt tools. And that's why my book is written from an agnostic methodology standpoint, so that even in the modeling of it, you can see this is just a suggestion. And
Hmm.
this is how a software development life cycle has been adapted, and you can adapt a methodology in your own environment. And it's different from cherry picking, right? Cherry picking is where you're in an engineering culture and you don't want to talk to people, so you lop off the planning and you lop off the evaluation and you learn nothing and you just focus on implement and build, and you're just, that's different. I'm not talking about cherry picking. I'm talking
Hmm.
about having a discipline, literally thinking through the end of a problem, starting with discover, ending with maintain, having good hygiene,
Hmm.
and understanding how to adapt tools within your environment. And so, what is good hygiene in your environment? And so, those two things are a literacy component in the data space that I think really that people need to pay attention to, especially in this new world.
Absolutely. I mean, and all of this progress on this like low code, no code, I think is making it harder for people
Yeah,
to realize that how important this is,
yeah.
this actual lineage piece that you're talking about. And all right, so for folks, the course is AI and digital fluency, preparing your data team for the future. Again, I will put a link in the description of this episode for more information on that. Christine, it was an absolute pleasure talking with you today.
Well, thank you.
I think you're obviously have a wealth of knowledge in this area. I think your course is going to do great. But would love to have you on again in the future. And for folks that may listen to this that might want to reach out and ask a question, what would be a great way for them to get in contact with you?
Email, my website, christinehaskell.com, LinkedIn, probably LinkedIn.
Sure. Okay, terrific. Well, thanks again, Christine, for your time. I really appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day.
No, thanks for having me.
To subscribe to the Speaking of Data podcast, or to learn more about TDWI's research and training on all things data management and analytics, visit tdwi.org or click the link in the description below. Thanks for tuning in.